Hello and welcome to Raising Good Eaters. This is a webinar and this is session 1 and we're calling this the Feeding Relationship. I'm Peggy Crum and I'll be your presenter for today. This is the first time here at Health for You that we've used Zoom webinar, so you're going to have to bear with us. Yeah, okay, here we go. We really hope this goes smoothly for all of us. If you have any feedback, suggestions, comments, or just helpful advice, just email us at the email address on this slide. Nicole Martin is Health for You's administrative assistant, and she's a newly indoctrinated Zoom webmaster. She's joining us today. Please enter any questions you might have in the Zoom Q&A panel. Nicole will be monitoring the questions as we go along to help resolve any technical problems you might be having. Any questions about the content of the webinar or that make you think of something going on in your own feeding relationship or with your child, I'll answer those at the end in the Q&A segment. But you can go ahead and enter your questions as you think of them. Well, let me take a moment to introduce myself. As I said, my name's Peggy Crum. I'm a registered dietitian. I've been working for Health for You for about 11 years, and I've been working at MSU for a total of 25 years. I'm also a faculty member with the Ellen Satter Institute. For a lot of years, I was a pediatric dietitian, first at Children's Hospital of St. Paul, and then here at MSU in the College of Human Medicine. Well, I've devoted a lot of years to helping others do their best with feeding their children, but by far, my best learning was done at the table with my own 2 children. They're both adults now, and my son has a baby of his own. These are the goals of this webinar series. By the end, I hope you'll learn what drives your child to eat the way he or she does, how to teach your child to be a good eater, and how to solve feeding problems with Ellen Satter's division of responsibility. Well, the feeding relationship. I want to introduce you to the feeding dynamics model, which describes the feeding relationship. Feeding dynamics says that children learn to eat or not eat by the way they're fed. Some feeding issues are so common they're considered normal. Picky eating is one of these. Did you know that's normal? Feeding problems such as finicky eating, mealtime tantrums, delays in feeding, and difficulty with food textures, while these are common, they're much harder to work through. But we'll work through some common and normal feeding issues in the course of this webinar. Or this webinar series. So our goal is to make it positive. Children are capable of learning to eat the foods their parents eat and what they see others around them eating. Children observe what foods others eat and assume, even if they don't eat them now, they assume that someday I will eat that. Children need adults to be supportive and companionable, and to give them opportunities to experiment with foods and to master eating. Their thought, and ours should be too, all in good time. Distill this down to 2 basic concepts: provide leadership and allow autonomy. The adult doing the feeding has everything to do with how well the feedings go. You provide leadership, you give autonomy. And by autonomy, I mean that you recognize your child's capabilities and allow him or her to be free thinking and self-directed. You trust your child to respond to his or her body's needs. Here's a 4-square of the patterns of parenting, looking at how parents combine those all-important concepts of leadership and autonomy. In general, parents align with one of these patterns pretty well. The top left square, authoritative, is the style that fits very nicely with the model I'll be teaching you today. Authoritative parents maintain clear leadership boundaries and have a high sensitivity for their child's opinions, desires, and capabilities. They trust and respect their children. Authoritative parents take leadership with feeding. They expect and assume that their children will work towards self-mastery in the feeding in eating themselves. Well, I like this image of a winding two-lane road because it reminds me that feeding children is like a trip or a journey, that sometimes, like the road in this image, has, well, it's smooth, but it has a few gentle curves in it. This kind of feeding journey is fairly peaceful and enjoyable, and you feel confident as a parent that you're doing a good job, kind of like driving on a well-maintained road, and that's familiar to you. Well, then, this can happen all of a sudden. The road changes and you're forced into managing something like this, or you just have no clue where to go. There are no clear signs, or maybe no signs at all, and what you have and what you might have been doing doesn't really make any sense anymore. You are forced on the fly into figuring out an entirely different feeding journey. Today, you'll learn that it just doesn't have to be that way. I want to share with you a personal story about my daughter when she was a baby. You may hear more stories about her because even though I was an experienced mother, she has an older brother, and I was a pediatric nutritionist at the time. She didn't know that. My experience and my expertise meant nothing to her. She marched to the beat of her own drummer and was a very different eater than her older brother. What was the same as her older brother was her sureness. She was absolutely sure what she would and would not eat, and she stopped eating when she had had enough. She just didn't want any more. Well, that was all very well and good until a routine checkup with our pediatrician. As he reviewed her growth chart with me, he gently asked about her weight. He said he could be okay with it if I was okay with it. And while her weight was steady, it was steadily high. I was surprised at how much the seed of doubt that the pediatrician planted made me less sure of trusting my daughter. Now, she didn't change, I changed, or at least I wondered. But a few years earlier, I'd heard Ellen Satter speak, and I must say that she made a lasting change in how I fed my own children. I learned about the division of responsibility, and I also learned what normal eating was for a child. It helped me think about my feeding strategies in a systematic way to define what worked and what didn't work. We not only became a family who functioned at the table according to the division of responsibility, but I also had a model of feeding to guide my work and to teach other families, which I continue to do to this day. So here she is. This is my daughter, and you can see she has some body fat. She has a natural midline fold in her arm, and she looks very well nourished, doesn't she? Well, I had to settle myself down, and I observed how my daughter ate. This is what I saw. I saw that she likes being at the table. Yeah, look at her. She's really enjoying that. She knows how to behave. She enjoys some of the familiar foods. There she's eating Cheerios, it's pretty familiar. She mostly ignored unfamiliar foods, but sometimes she'd pick them up and sometimes she'd put them in her mouth or she'd just push them aside. I saw that she stopped eating and she wanted to get down when she was full. And for sure, she ate different amounts every day. Ellen Satter's approach allowed me to recognize these qualities as indicators of normal and what is called competent eating. Thankfully, I knew that my daughter didn't need to change. In fact, had we intervened with her to try to make her not fat, we would have damaged her competency. There's now a whole literature on that, but we'll have to save that for another time. Fortunately, I renewed my confidence and trust in Betsy's ability. We continued to follow the division of responsibility, and she remained steady, growing at a higher percentile for weight than height. By kindergarten, her weight leveled out, and she looked really average for her height. Best of all, she grew up confident about her body. And that's just a wonderful gift we parents can give to our children. These are really excellent goals for parents to have for their children. For children, these are skills they gain over time by feeding well. You can see that this list, you may see this list and really have an uneasy feeling that you don't even have all of these characteristics yourself, let alone for your child. But that's okay. You'll learn about yourself as you parent your child following the division of responsibility. Well, before we can solve feeding challenges, we need to understand what normal eating is so that we can avoid treating normal eating as a problem. Do any of these sound familiar? It's normal for a child to eat a lot one day and just a little the next, to not eat a square meal but only eat one or two foods, to tire of even favorite foods, things that they've eaten all the time, and sometimes to experiment with new foods. To sit at the table to eat, even though they may not sit still, to enjoy being at the table but want to get down when they're full, and to rarely eat a new food the first time they see it, except for maybe sweets and French fries. I want to take just a moment here to talk about developmental stage. Development is so much more important than the age of the child. On this chart, which by the way you can find online, and I've given the reference there, you'll see a rather broad age range. Well, that's rightfully so, because each child progresses at his or her own tempo. The sequence is always the same, but certain tasks may take center stage at different ages. Each task needs to come before they can work on the next one. We need to accept and trust the developmental tempo of the individual child and put aside feeding agendas and just watch for capabilities to emerge. I like this chart, and I realize it only goes up to age 5 years. We have some parents in the audience who have older children, and I'll try to include some developmental stages and what you can expect at each stage for older children, say the school-age child and on up through adolescence. But Satter's division of responsibility really works well for all ages. It's based on trust. And here's why we can trust children with their eating. Mother Nature has fine-tuned children to ensure their survival. It's the parent's job to respect and trust what Mother Nature's given them. I'm going to go through these one by one because it's really important for you to understand how deep a child's eating drives are. And I believe that this will help you to trust your child's eating. We're going to start at the top here. You can see hunger at the very top of this model. Children are born with the ability to regulate the amount they eat so they can grow at the pace that's right for them. Their hunger is based on their physical activity, internal activities like involuntary muscle movement, like their heart beating or blood circulating, their metabolism, maintenance of body chemistry, and that very all-important rate of growth. These are invisible factors that influence a child's energy needs and thus their hunger and thus their survival. Going around to the right, you'll see pleasure. Children seek pleasure from their relationships and from what they eat. Children prefer food that tastes and looks good to them. That don't we all? Pleasure seeking is a core human trait. Going on around to the right, down to appetite. Well, appetite is distinct from hunger. Children have appetites that favor a variety of food because variety is what ensures nutritional adequacy. Now, you may be thinking, I don't see my child eating a lot of variety, but we'll get to that in a moment. This is a preference children are born with because it favors their survival. Their appetite will drive them to eat high protein food some days, butter, butter and other fats by the spoonful or the handful even for maybe weeks on end, carbohydrates some days, and on other occasions, loads of vegetables and fruits. That's seeking variety. It won't be all of the food groups in one meal, nor does it really need to be. Toddler-age children are naturally skeptical of new foods. That's important for survival too, or at least it used to be when children would wander off without the careful supervision of a parent. Their instincts told them to be wary of the berries because it might be poisonous. And last here is social connections. Children are innately social. In fact, sociability is a marker of child development. In all cultures, eating is a social event that we now call family mealtime. Family meals benefit children in profound and sometimes surprising ways. There's been so much research in this area, and I can just tell you that children do better when they connect on a regular basis with their parents over a meal. These four drives are present in all of us. If you're human, you have these drives. Our job as parents is to feed in a way that children keep their strong connection to those drives. Well, how do we know all of this? There's been studies, lots of studies. Children's eating has gotten a lot of attention in recent years, but there are many classic studies, this slide showing one dating clear back to the 20s, the 1920s. I just want to share three classic studies with you today, and I'm going to try to go through these fairly quickly, but just so you know that there's been some really interesting things, and then these studies have really formed a basis for many others to develop from there. In 1984, Dr. Adair published a case study of a boy she followed from about 1 week of age to about 9 months of age. And as an infant, his daily intake varied by 300%. His food intake was lower than most other babies his age, yet his growth was consistent, and he was really average for length and weight, following right along at the 50th percentile. So the point of this is that intake varies greatly for individual children. And then there's a study by Dr. Sam Foman, who was a pediatrician at the University of Iowa. He led a study with babies to see if their hunger could be tricked. Babies were fed formula with varying concentration. When the babies were fed formula with more calories per ounce, they took less. And when babies were fed formula that was dilute, that is fewer calories per ounce, they took more. The babies consistently ate more or less to meet their internal hunger and satiety drives. In other words, the babies were able to compensate, except when they were fed formula without fat, that is, like skim milk. They took more than the babies physically could hold. The babies couldn't take enough to make up the difference for trying to eat a formula with no fat in it. And then this last one listed here is one of my favorites. There's so much learning from this Davis study. The subjects were 15 older babies in an orphanage-like setting. Developmentally, they were just starting to eat solid foods. They were introduced to solids by having many different foods placed on a tray in front of them, and there was no parent or interaction from an adult other than a nurse sat nearby with a spoon in her hand, but she wasn't allowed to engage with the babies unless they engaged with her. 5 of the children had rickets, a disease of calcium and vitamin D deficiency. Let me just summarize by saying that all of the children had great appetites and they thrived. The children all chose different foods from meal to meal. And a high meal could be a single food, or it could be a variety of foods. The really interesting takeaway for me was one of the children that had rickets, the one with the most severe rickets. And he chose to eat food that contained cod liver oil. I don't know if you've ever had the chance to taste cod liver oil, but it's pretty bitter and pretty off-putting. What's remarkable, besides the fact that he chose to eat it, is that he took the cod liver oil in varying amounts until his blood calcium and phosphorus became normal, and his x-rays showed that his rickets were all healed. And then at that point, he stopped taking the foods with cod liver oil. In all, he took 2 ounces of cod liver oil. That's a quarter of a cup. Well, I guess the point is here that we can trust and should trust our children to eat when we provide them with enough food to support their curiosity and their growth. Eating is a skill children learn from their parents. This is my son, Nathan, who's now a big adult man, and he doesn't ride a little bike anymore. But I want to tell you about feeding well by talking about other skills that children learn. And if we could think about feeding like teaching any other learned skill, I think that's really helpful. These are the things that children need in order to learn. They need understanding. You need to understand your child's learning style. You need to provide them with developmentally appropriate tasks with food or toys or really any kind of learning. They need opportunities to learn, and that just means they need practice. Like everybody needs practice when we're learning a new skill. And you must trust that your child is capable of learning. Now, you've undoubtedly taught your child a new skill, such as singing a song or dancing or playing a sport or really any kind of game. Riding a bike is a new skill. And this is a story about when Nathan learned to ride a two-wheeler. Now, this happened nearly 30 years ago, but it's absolutely vivid in my memory. His dad and I understood that our 4-year-old was a pretty good learner when it came to physical skills. We knew that he needed a developmentally appropriate bicycle, like this one, a small one with wide tires and training wheels to help him keep his balance, and a helmet to protect his head when he toppled over. He needed lots of opportunities to learn. We taught him to push forward and down on the pedals to make the bike go, and to push backward for the brakes to stop. He needed one of us to run alongside him at first and then to ride with him. We trusted that he would learn the skills he needed to pedal the bike and to keep his balance and to stay safe and to have fun. The trust we had in Nathan to learn a new skill came through from the first. He did have a strong intuitive sense about bike riding. From the get-go, he knew he would learn to balance on his own and to ride without training wheels. And before we were ready, just a week after his 4th birthday, he asked his dad to take off the training wheels. So off came the training wheels, and off went Nathan on that little bike with a helmet on his head. Well, if you think about eating is a skill that our children need to learn, that's kind of a contrast with how we may think about eating. I think that teaching a new skill is intuitive for most of us, but we oftentimes overlook this same necessary process in teaching our children how to eat. We often expect children just to know how to eat the foods we offer them. We may not be aware that eating is a skill that also must be learned over a long period, a skill that is learned from their parents. Like any skill, learning to eat requires that parents have an understanding of their child. For instance, if she's a cautious learner or an adventuresome learner. Some children will try just about any new food, while others approach new foods with a sense of caution that really pretty much overrides any desire for adventures in eating. Learning the skill of eating requires parents to provide developmentally appropriate foods and eating an environment in order to make eating pleasurable and safe. For instance, starting solids before a baby is ready would be a good example. Or another example is expecting a child to eat with utensils when they aren't developmentally ready for that. For the young child, eating is the main task. Adding the requirement of utensils just makes that task harder and frustrating. That'd be like giving Nathan an oversized bike with narrow tires, or even that small bike without training wheels to start with. He's not going to learn as well. And children need parents to provide lots of opportunities to learn to eat those new foods and to sit at the table. Without pressuring and without catering, just having a varied menu of foods for the family meal provides children with continued opportunities to learn. And then lastly, the parent must trust the child that the child is capable of learning to eat all kinds of foods. Well, here's another story about Betsy. She knows I tell these stories, by the way. I learned a lot from her. Bean soup was one main dish that was on the winter menu rotation in our family. Well, Nathan was just as adventurous at the table as he was on the bike, so most any food was fine with him. He ate the bean soup and the cornbread and anything else that was on the table, but not Betsy. I served up the soup so that it could be cool, and her little bowl would just sit there. Sometimes she would give her bowl a little push aside to get it away from her plate. I could have assumed Betsy to be a bean soup hater, rather than thinking of her as a child who just needed many more opportunities. This would be equivalent to putting the bike away after Nathan toppled over once or twice. It's the picky eater who most of all needs the parents' trust that someday she'll eat bean soup, and other foods for that matter. Well, we persisted in having bean soup on a regular basis, maybe once a month or so in the winter months, and Betsy continued to not eat any of it. I kid you not. That went on for 3 or 4 years. There were many bean soup meals where she ate only the fruit and drank her milk. The rest of us ate bean soup because we liked it. It was delicious. I must admit, it was difficult to keep from intervening and having her try it. But I trusted the trust model, and I trusted Betsy. Well, one bean soup day, out of the clear blue, she took a bite of bean soup. That was it, a single bite. I couldn't help but notice and leap with joy just a little bit, but I didn't say anything. Then a couple days later, when the leftovers were served, she ate several bites. You can see this was a memorable moment as I'm recalling it from, 25 years later. The next time we had bean soup, she took a second helping. Now, as an adult, she might not list bean soup as a favorite food, but for a while she did. I'm not kidding you. She listed it as a favorite food. Without forcing or cajoling, Betsy learned to eat bean soup. The research says that children need as many as 20 neutral experiences with a new or challenging food to learn to like it. Or maybe the child doesn't like it. Even then, tastes change and abilities with textures develop. Not liking a food the first time or two doesn't mean she won't eat bean soup someday. 20 times. We parents tend to give up after 2 or 3 offerings. Being a part of the family mealtime is also a skill children must learn from you. Parents often put up with difficult mealtime behaviors without using the type of teaching skills they might use in their backyards or the parks or like the driveway. Children need parents to understand that they require developmentally appropriate expectations and rules for how to sit at the table and be part of the family. That's the first skill children need to learn, how to sit at their place at the table if they're going to eat. Well, that, by the way, is not Betsy, but it's a cute baby who's learning and experiencing new foods. I like this quote from Dr. Slater. Feeding is where child development, parenting, nutrition, and growth come together. Well, here it is. What I learned for the first time about 30 years ago that got me through many feeding dilemmas, both at my table and in helping others. Ellen Satter first published The Feeding Relationship in 1986. This feeding model puts authoritative parenting into action. You see that feeding is parenting in so many ways. In this series, we're talking and learning about feeding, but as you practice and experience success with this feeding relationship, you'll see how this leadership autonomy model really translates into other areas of raising children. If eating competencies, as you see here at the end of the arrow, or normal eating behaviors is really what that is. If that's the goal or the destination of the journey, then the division of responsibility is the roadmap that gets you there. Parents provide leadership and structure while staying in their lane, and children are allowed autonomy to eat what they need and to grow. That part that's listed under parent or feeder in parentheses, that what, when, and where, that is so important. And then on the other side of the road, that those two items listed under the child or the eater, the whether and the how much, that's equally important. Like a road with a double yellow line, the division of responsibility says to stay in your lane. Don't pass, don't cross over the line of responsibility. Getting in someone else's lane puts the feeder and the eater at risk. Staying in your lane prevents a lot of crashes. The tasks in your lane for the feeder are what is served, for meals and snacks, when food is served, and where food is eaten. Your child or the eater gets to decide whether or not he'll eat and how much of each food. A little or a lot. Expect it to vary from meal to meal, from snack to snack, and from day to day. His needs are always changing, and he's really the best expert in adjusting to meet those needs. Prevention is primary. Applying the feeding dynamics from the get-go prevents incompetence from happening. I like to think of the division of responsibility as the best prevention for eating and feeding problems. It helps to stabilize growth, prevents obesity, prevents picky eating from becoming finicky eating or disordered eating. We also use the division of responsibility to treat, to restore eating and feeding competencies. While that topic is outside the realm of this webinar series, I can help you manage that problem feeding, and I'll tell you more about that towards the end. Okay. Well, what could possibly go wrong? What are the bumps in the road? How do crashes occur? In a word, pressure. In another word, control. And you'll see on this list, and I'll go through it with you here, that these are all examples of how we as parents with our behavior put pressure on the child to eat or try to control the eating. Rather than trusting, we parents tend to turn up the pressure and attempt to get control. We might do short order cooking or kid-friendly menus or bite rules, no thank you helpings, giving up on new foods, promising a special food if only they eat, giving them the eye, allowing grazing, and on and on. These are all a collection of examples from 2 studies about pressures to eat. The last one is anecdotal. That was from my own childhood, and I resolved that problem by just putting the peas back in the bowl. And your child will figure out workarounds too. So really best to just sit back and enjoy your meal once you get it on the table. These are your feeding responsibilities: to choose and prepare the food, make meal times pleasant, support your child in learning, disallow grazing, maintaining structure, and letting your child grow in his or her own way. Harkening back to that story about Betsy. She grew up to be in the body that's right for her. Every child has that ability. And this is your child's capabilities. Your child, remember that your child wants to eat. Your child knows how much to eat. Your child will learn to eat the foods you eat. Your child will behave well at the table and will grow predictably. So this is called the trust model for a reason. Trust is a two-way street, but you have to take the leadership role and do your jobs consistently. Your child trusts you to provide food on a regular schedule, and you trust him to cope, to eat what he needs, and to grow. And the rewards really are great. The feeding goes best if you do your jobs, and you get to enjoy your meal too. Well, I'm going to sort of run through this slide because I want to get to any questions that we might be having, but we'll work on this more. But I want to just say right here that meals don't have to be ideal. You and your family will benefit from the structure, sociability, and security that meals and planned snacks provide for you and your children. They provide the structure that we all need to feel supportive, and the meals and snacks should be offered by you on a regular basis, not demanded by your child. These are just some suggestions, and I've included this in your handout. Be sure and include some kind of bread at the table, include some kind of fat. That's very important for children. Pairing familiar and unfamiliar foods and favorites with not so favorites, and then just get it all on the table or the blanket or the coffee table or wherever you plan to eat together, and gather everybody around. These are some resources. We will have those 2 booklets that you see there on the right of the screen. We'll have those available to you to purchase through Health for You.